Hi there, welcome to another interview. I am super excited because I've got somebody I used to talk to nearly every week when I started my carnivore journey, when MeatRx was in its infancy. She's one of the best people I've ever spoken to about coaching, always very supportive. So I am so pleased to finally interview Becky. Hi, Becky.
Hi, Stephen. And it's wonderful. It's been so long. It seems like that was forever ago, but it's hard to believe that was just like 5 years ago that we started out, on a former platform. So it's great to be here with you today, and thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, that's okay. I do often reference you when I'm talking about low blood sugar and hypoglycemic events, and not to worry because, you know, there's somebody I used to speak to that performed pretty well. And I did already talk to Becky just before we started because I wanted to get into that first because you are the person that I talk about, but I never name check, but I will name check now. Now I've got your permission. So that's one of the things. I get a lot of people very hung up on normal ranges, in inverted commas, when we look at bloods, and certainly with blood glucose, worried about it's 103 and I want it to be 67 or whatever, and then they worry about being hypoglycemic. But what was your experience when you started measuring your blood glucose?
So when I first started, obviously I was pre-diabetic, so I'm coming from that realm, right? My blood sugar was 100 plus, right? So it was relatively high. When I went carnivore, it did bring it down. Of course, then it was still ranging in the hundreds, right? I was only eating meat because the person that we were all following, right, with MeatRx, Sean Baker, I'm in the middle of Nebraska. So I thought, I can eat steaks every day. I can eat steaks for every meal, but it was still raising that blood sugar to a level, and it was maintaining, right? It was to a level that I really didn't want it. And so then we started experimenting with high fat. Well, that would bring it down into, quote, standard normal range, right? But then throughout talking to Sean, we did different experiments, and that's where he's like, okay, this is what he's like, non-medical advice, right? But if you're comfortable with and you feel good with, I want you to try this. Because not only did I have the finger stick, but I had the continuous glucose. And so we raised my fat like up over 300 grams in a day. I had my adequate protein in there, and it drove that blood sugar down. But the alternate thing that it did was bring that ketones up. So that inverse reaction of, lowering the blood sugar, and by lowering, we're talking, 40s, 50s. I have it posted on my social media of, that time period. And a lot of people would freak out with that, right? They'd be like, oh my gosh, hypoglycemic, you're going to end up in a coma. I felt great. My ketones were up. That is the key point, is having those ketones up. My body was running off of ketones. My body thrived in ketosis. I did not get the headaches or, anything like that many people get with being in that deeper level. I mean, we're talking very therapeutic ketosis, and I felt fine. I was energetic. I was talking. I'll never forget the day that Sean, in a meeting, we were discussing the fact of what my blood sugar was at that point, and I'm showing, and you could see it in people's face. They're like, and I'm like, people, I am here. I am talking. I am, I am very, how do I want to say it? Making sense, right? I'm not talking out, a slurred speech or laying on the floor. I mean, I was active. I was working. I was still doing my daily activities on the farm and everything else. So I felt great, but that is the big thing. And ultimately, I did reverse my A1C from a 6.0 to a 4.8 throughout, part of that being the method too. But
Yeah, and that's the thing. People freaking out about a number. You see, this is why I say to people, it's no good looking at just your blood glucose and freaking out, because we need to know the ketones, which I have no affiliation with, say, Keto Mojo, but it really does help, because if you don't know what the other source of energy is doing, you can't freak out about the glucose level. And also, glucose is not the enemy. Ketones are not the enemy. They're both valid forms of energy. And it's just an arbitrary thing when people say that is hypoglycemic. Hypoglycemic is literally that, low blood glucose, but you have to look at symptoms. And if someone runs really great on that lower level, it's probably because now in this day and age, they're powered by ketones. It's a bit like having a hybrid car and realizing you're running out of gas, but your battery's full. Sooner or later, maybe you're going to fill up with gas, and then your battery won't be needed because you've got gas. It's just, crazy that there's these two things in our system to give us energy, ketones and glucose, but people focus on the glucose. So it was fun times, wasn't it, when we started at MeatRx with Sean? How do you look back at that?
It was a lot of fun times. I appreciate it. I love the connections and the network that we made because we all have different backstories, and it is an N equals one, right? We all were able to do it a little bit differently. Some of us had to go beyond, which was myself. Right. I had to go beyond just the nutrition side of things and look at the other realms of life in connection with that. And in my interview that I did with Sean most recently, we talk about the fact of doing high fat and, the different ways of doing it. But ultimately, even when I was still turned into Rivero after it was MeatRx, and I was able to reintroduce foods, but going also on that aspect of flipping between your fuel sources, right? Whether you're burning glucose or whether you're burning the ketones, the metabolic flexibility. And I think a lot of people are resistant. That's why I wasn't able to switch back and forth. And in our MeatRx days, many of us coaches would come together in a lot of the meetings, supporting each other, for their meeting and whatever. But a lot of us were also like, hey, we can't do, this because I don't feel good, right? I personally couldn't do the high protein. I could not bring that fat down. I felt horrible. My body was not able at that point 5 years ago to switch between those fuel sources. It thrived on ketones, but that was also because I had a lot of those underlying metabolic conditions.
Yeah, I like the phrase beyond nutrition. So can you tell me what you mean by that?
So when I looked at these other areas, right, I had gut health, I had thyroid, I actually had Hashimoto's, is what I had. And I was on medication. Ultimately, when I started this process, I was on 7 different medications, and I'm like, I'm done. I don't want to take medications. I want to be able to balance this naturally, whether at that time, all I knew was diet, right? That was the place I went. That's why I went carnivore. And it helped with some of those. It did help with the gut health. It helped with the cardiac issues that I was dealing with, asthma, all of those type of things. Because when I would go exercise or when I would end up and go outside and it was cold, I would have that reactive asthma. And so carnivore did help with lowering the inflammation and fixing those things. But the thing that it ultimately didn't fix was my antibodies. I had to go into grounding, circadian rhythm. I got certified from Quantum Biology Collective in 2021 and looking at all of these other areas, the parasympathetic work. Right? Many people don't focus on that, and they're burning the candle at both ends, their hormones. So also backtrack. At 29, I had a hysterectomy. I never took HRT, but I am able to balance all of that because my adrenals pick up the slack. But when we're stressed out, the adrenals don't have that ability. Adrenals and thyroid are too busy trying to produce cortisol so that, we can run on this stressed out state. And so my body was just overtaxed. It was not fixing the antibodies. My Hashimoto's wasn't getting better. But then when I got certified and I started being very consistent with my circadian routine, with my grounding, I do seasonal cold exposure. And then in March of 2021, I was also starting to reintroduce and flex between the fuel sources. And for me, that little bit of carbs, that quicker glucose hit off of, whole foods, right? When I speak of carbs, I'm not talking about Twinkies and Ho-Hos and those type of things. I'm talking about whole foods, seasonal appropriate foods, and my antibodies, recovered. I put Hashimoto's in remission, and I am still to this day maintaining my weight loss and maintaining the fact that I am not on any pharmaceutical medication.
Yeah, and that's the bottom line. That's the thing, isn't it? You mentioned seasonal and appropriate, really, rather than 500 grams of fruit and honey every single day. This is the thing with, it's a bit more nuanced. I'm not a big fan of fruit and honey, but I have an apple tree. I'm not a big fan of apples, but if I was really hungry and there was no food in the house, I would pick an apple and I'd eat an apple. So hunter-gatherers definitely wouldn't walk past a bush full of berries. But this is where we get these stupid nutrition wars, really, because all you're saying is you added a little bit of carbs back, but when it was appropriate for you, for your physiology, with your background. You're an individual. You've got different health issues. You've had different surgery, but strict carnivore didn't work for you the way you wanted. You did on many things. but thyroid, you felt it was the best thing to do was to add carbs. So what are you doing then? I mean, you said seasonal, so does that mean you have a couple of months where you are carnivore, or
Yep.
how does it work?
Yep. Because I'm in Nebraska with my latitude, my seasons are already changing, right? We're already running into fall. Probably within the next, I would say month and a half, we're expecting our first snowfall. So a lot of even those fall time cellar stable foods are not going to end up and be an option. What I do is then ferments, because ferments have a positive aspect when it comes to gut health and the microbiome as well. So I will add in like sauerkraut, kimchi. I have started doing some lactobacillus reuteri yogurt that I access raw milk. Literally the farm is about 30-40 minutes maybe from me. I get the fresh milk. I mean, we're talking from cow to my jar, maybe 20-30 minutes. So it is about as fresh raw milk as what you can get. And I use that to end up and make my yogurt. I do a long fermentation aspect with the yogurt, about 36 hours. But like I said, the sauerkraut, kimchi, all of those type of things, ferment is typically what I will have in like November, December, January, February. We don't start getting like spring asparagus, greens, anything along those lines, which are good. When I look at it from a therapeutic aspect, they're good for the liver, right? They're bitters, they're good for the liver, but they don't start, I can't access them in the middle of, January, we'll say. I can't access a pineapple or a banana or mango or whatever else, the carnivore that adds fruit and honey, right? Down close to the equator that he ends up and he adds in the middle of winter. I can't, I don't have it. And that creates a dysfunction. When you are consuming something like that, your body is perceiving, well, most people's body, this is the other aspect of the circadian. Many people are living a modern lifestyle. They're inside, they're on computers, they're on technology, which nothing against them. We would not be where we're at. I would not end up and know you if I did not have technology, right? So nothing against them, but many people are what we call blue light toxic. They're around these devices. They're under overhead lights and, everything all day. They're never getting outside. They're not connecting with natural circadian rhythm. They're not putting feet to the ground and doing grounding. And so it creates this dysfunction because the body, when you are aligned on that side, the body perceives nature. That's also why I go outside in the middle of winter, because my body has these receptors that will tell my body, hey, it's middle of winter, right? Same thing with animals. That's why they end up and they get a bushier coat. That's why they are able to add kind of that layer of fat to keep them warm. When we consume foods out of season, it sends this signal to our body, which you got to look at like the electrons, the protons, and that side of things, because it sends a signal to the gut and that it is a certain season. This food is growing. It took this UV light to grow this food, and so we're consuming it. But our eyes and our skin are perceiving it differently, and it creates a circadian mismatch also on the digestive system. And the gut is like the second brain, right? So the gut's saying it's one thing, the brain's saying it's another, because that's what it's interpreting through our eyes. And it's a mismatch. And that's where we end up when we get a lot of metabolic health, insulin resistance, leptin resistance, secondary cortisol response. It's not that cortisol is bad. It's just being stimulated at the wrong times of the day.
Yeah, and that's, see, I love the way you talk about cortisol, because I do this about insulin. Insulin isn't bad. It's the inappropriate elevated levels and the constant level. So can you just speak a little bit more about leptin then? Because that's one of the things I feel, whatever you're eating, we seem to have lost the signal with leptin and to know when we're full up. So what do you do to get around that?
So leptin is a hormone that docks to the hypothalamus at night. People that are exposed to blue light at night, people that are wired but tired and overstimulating cortisol, eating too close to bed, because leptin is like on the axis of cortisol and insulin. So if your cortisol is elevated, if your insulin is elevated, then you're not going to end up and have this leptin docking to the hypothalamus. The leptin is the hormone that tells our body, hey, you have fat reserves to use, right? You have energy on your body to burn. And this is where, again, going back to, that metabolic flexibility, many people aren't able to fast. They feel horrible when they fast. They feel hangry between meals. they're very leptin resistant. You are leptin resistant before you are ever insulin resistant. It is one of the first things that happens is you get this resistance, and it's like many people don't understand it, right? They just end up and chug along. Well, then kind of like if a person is diabetic, it's not, bam, you're diabetic, right? This has been accumulating over the years. Same thing with the leptin resistance. When I feel mine probably happened back when I was working night shift, I was not eating properly. I was just really not very circadian aligned, if you will. And I was not focused on limiting my light at night. Many people in the Beyond Nutrition community that will see me on a meeting at night, normally I'm sitting up here in the office under red light, or, I have my blue blockers on, things like that, because that is going to help to control the cortisol. I space my meals and my fasting to go back kind of to the wintertime and the food. My wintertime eating is different than my summertime. I still end up and space my meals in the summertime away from food or away from bed about 3-4 hours. But in the wintertime, when it's starting to get dark at 4 or 5 o'clock, the body needs more rest in the winter. That's kind of the rest, restore, repair. And if you're eating late at night, your body is getting, again, it's another missed signal, right? And so if you, in the wintertime, I do circadian fasting. I'm done eating by sunset. That can be 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon because it's dark. It's starting to get dark here. And that allows the body, but also proper sleep. That is the other area that I go on Beyond Nutrition about is sleep. You have to get adequate sleep. There's a lot of processes that happen at night, right? The liver does its thing, the gallbladder, but part of this process in the first couple hours of sleeping is this leptin docking to the hypothalamus. The leptin has to dock. That also goes into seeing sunrise the next day, because this will end up and recycle into daytime hormone. So melatonin is also produced. That's another natural hormone, right, that is produced at night, but you're not going to have melatonin production if you stimulate your cortisol, your insulin, and that aspect. So ultimately, you got to have melatonin in order for the leptin to dock, but the melatonin is also cycled into serotonin the next day. So it's on this like cycle, right? If you take a piece out, the cycle isn't going to run, and that's where that we get this disconnect and this metabolic dysfunction.
Yeah, and I think this is it. By the way, we both are aware of the irony of talking about blue light and screens. But you're right, and I do say this quite a bit. It's the way the world is, and this is actually one of the reasons why sometimes people have to supplement, not because the diets are rubbish or the food's rubbish, is because we've done things in our life that just are not natural. They're not natural, and when I say the food's not rubbish, the system is. That's the problem. So if you went back to regenerative farming and the soil was fantastic and we didn't have plastics in the ocean, we probably wouldn't have half the problems that we've got, but we have got those problems, and that's a reality, right? And sadly, the only way to get this word out is to do these things in front of the screens and stuff. So we have to mitigate it. And I think that, let's just get real, that is what happens. You touched on something else, which I didn't know about you, which was working night shifts. The night shifts is a nightmare. Have you got any advice for people that are struggling because they want to do all these things, but as we just said, it's a harsh reality. They have to work nights. What's the best way to mitigate the problems that brings with it?
Yeah, we're definitely not bashing the modern system, right? Because none of us would be where we're at. None of us would be able to share our message. We wouldn't have our communities, we want to be on Zoom or, Riverside or anything along those lines if we didn't have that. So I do appreciate the modern life, right? But on the other hand, things like the blue blockers for night shift, hospitals still have to work, factory work, sometimes end up and have, the nighttime shift work, all of those. So we are not able to outrun that. Same way we're not, unfortunately, as much as I hate it, we're not going to be able to outrun and constantly seek an area that doesn't have 5G or doesn't have Wi-Fi or doesn't have, anything along these lines. We can't constantly outrun it, but there are things that we can do. And part of that is becoming very connected with nature, right? I was outside every morning. I go outside, I ground, I see the sunrise. I spend extra time, when I know that I'm going to be on the computer. Those are just my non-negotiables. So I am constantly out there doing that. The other thing is the blue blocker. So my computer screen is red right now because I have a software on that that turns the screen red, so I'm not being blasted with that blue light. I have a wired headphone instead of Bluetooth, those type of things. But if you're at work, wearing the blue blockers. So there's different glasses that you can end up and wear. These, of course, are my orange ones. But there's things like this that you can end up and put on, and you can still function. I can still read my computer. You can still do things, but that's going to end up and filter some of that bad light that is in the hospitals or fluorescent lights that are in factories, that type of thing. So wearing the blue light. The other thing, and I don't have one up here, but normally I will tell people wear like a lab coat or a sweater or something, because there's receptors in our skin that are going to absorb that light as well. And that is a secondary signal. So the other thing, when you are on technology, opening a window behind you, the light coming in. I know many people will say, when I'm on interviews, that light behind you ends up and, is kind of filtering you out. But that light behind me, when I have the window open, is actually beneficial because it's allowing light to come on, which kind of offsets a little bit the light that standard people would get from a computer. It just really offsets that artificial lighting, but nothing is going to replace the fact of being able to be connected with nature. Getting out, taking light breaks. The big thing with night shift workers are, still end up and see a circadian rhythm, but getting proper sleep. Blackout curtains, making your room cold, because many of them are sleeping during the day when temperatures are elevated. So making sure you have a fan or something, window air conditioner in your bedroom so that it is colder, because you will get better deep sleep. And that's going to end up and, help. My mom is 79 years old and she's worked night shift for years. So we've done several of these strategies, but then also the first thing when you get up, that needs to end up and be one of your things too, is going outside and being connected. So it is still a circadian mismatch. I would go, if you are working night shift, I would go low carb, maybe even carnivore, because part of the aspect with circadian rhythm is the way that the sun helps us to digest and metabolize those carbs and convert those carbs. Which is why I go carnivore in the winter, right? I don't have that UV index to help me with the conversion of those, to help me with depleting the deuterium that comes in high sugar foods. So that is a whole nother aspect, which we don't go into, right, is the deuterium aspect. But that is, for those type of people, that is where I would end up and recommend going extremely low carb, if not carnivore.
Do you want to go into deuterium a little bit more? Because I'm always happy to talk about that.
We can, yeah. I'm obviously not 100% the expert in regards of deuterium. There's several out there, but it's not that it is bad, right? Yes, it is in food. Yes, there are other anti-nutrients in foods as well. And that's one of the things that a lot of people in the carnivore space, they're like, all these anti-nutrients. Well, I get that if you are sensitive to anti-nutrients, but our body also, if you have a good filtration rate, you have a good aligned system, has the ability to filter a lot of these anti-nutrients and the deuterium aspect. So when we have deuterium, it is a molecule, right? It is a hydrogen, but again, it's not that hydrogen is bad, because I consume hydrogen water, and it's not that hydrogen is bad in our system. It's how is our body filtering a lot of this out. And again, many people need to do deuterium depletion because their body is over-filtrated with the deuterium.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that people do get into once we get into the weeds. We're not going to here because that's not the point of this. But if people want to get into the weeds, you can. And there are experts out there, and people like Dr. Sarah Pugh talks about it. Deuterium depleted water. The best way to get that is the metabolic water within our food. So a ribeye, for instance, is 70% water. So that's low deuterium water that you're getting there. It's not drinking 5.5 litres of tap water. That's not going to help you at all. So what I'm really keen to hear about as well, Becky, is what is BNC? What's that?
BNC is the community that I founded when I realized that I needed to go beyond nutrition. So it's Beyond Nutrition Community. We end up and kind of have the same as what we started on, right? We started on a platform where people had meetings. They could come, They could discuss all these other, areas of life, right? Where maybe it was their diabetes, maybe it was gut health, maybe, whatever the case may have been. But when I realized that I'll end up and rephrase that because I can't speak for others in the community, but there are many in there that needed to look beyond just the foods they were consuming. It worked until it didn't type method. And they had done several other realms within it. We had some that did just lamb. We had some that did high fat. We had some that did low fat. They tried all these experiments with the nutrition, but it only got them so far, and they had to go beyond and look at their the addiction model. So I have coaches that are underneath me. They host several meetings per week. We have about 12 meetings actually per week, daytime meetings, evening meetings. We also have community socials where people can get together. A lot of people in their home life don't have support. And that is the biggest thing for people moving forward in this, is being able to have support, being able to bounce ideas off and not feel like they have two heads when they're talking about something, right? I can remember even when I started in the MeatRx community of bringing grounding in, and people are like, what? You're putting your bare feet on the ground? It was like I was some foreign person with two heads. And so anyway, it is a community. We focus a lot on nutrition, but we also focus on circadian rhythm. We focus on sleep. We have a meeting for mental health and addiction. So the coach that hosts that is a former, she has healed her bipolar and her addiction to not only food, but other substances through lifestyle practices. I do a intuitive step and a lunar aspect. So I go into how the moon and the cycle and, all of that ends up playing a factor in maybe what we are doing. And we focus on affirmations, frequency, aromatherapy. So you can see over my shoulder, I have essential oils. I focus on aromatherapy instead of, hey, here's this pill for pain. Okay, what oil can we end up and use? And I've actually had people that have switched off of pharmaceutical medications for nausea and vomiting to essential oils as well as pain. And they've been able to, between the addiction meeting and the aromatherapy, they've been able to break that addiction of pain medications. Again, not medical advice in there, just aspects of how we can use nature to our benefit in some of these practices. And yeah, we go beyond the nutrition, but it's set up the same way. We have a forum where people can constantly, if they have questions or need support or find articles. We have exercise aspects as well. We have a lot of people in there that lift and exercise. And so they're constantly posting like their PRs and what their routine is and all of that. But it is all these areas beyond that are just as important in our life, right? In our lifestyle as the nutrition is. But like I said, it's beyond nutrition coaching community. So it's BNC community.
Yeah. Did you work with Ben Azadi for a bit as well?
I do, yeah. And it's so funny that what's that?
Yeah. You still do you?
I still do, which I have a meeting after this with him. I've been with Ben for almost 2 years. I also work with Sarah Kleiner. So I am a busy person. I have my own community that I founded. And like I said, we have about 12 meetings per week between me and my coaches over there. And then I work for Ben Azadi in the Keto Camp Academy, and I coach for him. I bring a lot of these circadian aspects into the keto community. That is kind of my focus, is metabolic, hormones, and circadian rhythm. And then I also work for Sarah Kleiner Wellness with Sarah Pugh. So it's Sarah, and myself that end up and work for, and that's obviously where we go a lot into the leptin resistance. She's got a great program in regards to that. She also has a program in regards of the deuterium depletion that her and Sarah Pugh have done. And I know you interviewed Sarah Pugh. So yeah, the three of us work over there as well.
Yeah, it's brilliant. And I get a few messages every week saying, Stephen, why do you have different experts on to talk about their coaching? It's because I want people to get better. All right. Yeah, I know I offer coaching, but sometimes if someone's got a problem that I don't feel it's just simply nutrition, and it's beyond nutrition, yeah, I'll talk about grounding, I'll talk about addiction and emotional eating and all that sort of stuff. But sometimes they want a special group. So now, they've got another video they can watch and they can think, oh, that sounds what I want. The thing is, nobody does the wrong thing deliberately. Nobody will say, well, I tried carnivore, but last night I gave in to my emotional eating because it's so good for me. They do it because they can't work out how to control it. And they need that sort of help, don't they? And I think, I just want to touch on when you spoke about grounding, because it's how we talk about grounding. Yes, you could say that sounds very woo-woo, but what if we'd never done this sort of grounding stuff before, and we were the first people on the internet ever, okay? And we said, right, we got some advice for children and young adults, and even adults actually. Wrap your feet up in plastic and rubber, and whatever you do, don't touch the grass. Now, doesn't that sound woo-woo? Doesn't that sound weird? Yeah.
Right.
I mean,
well, and that's where we've gone is essentially we are a very sanitary and sterile environment, right? We have got this so far disconnected, right? Whether it's things that we're using in our home to clean the home, right? To control the germs. That's why also our gut, again, going clear back, right? A lot of our health starts in our gut, but yet we're creating this environment that is so sanitary and sterile that our body doesn't have these defense mechanisms that it had even 100 years ago. So I get we're in different environment. I get we're in different areas, but like you said, if you wrap your feet in plastic because, oh no, there may be germs, right? Don't end up in, I get it. I understand, but there's also the time where we need micro dosing exposure to some of this. And to go back to your coaching aspect, that is where I also went in the realm of, I don't care where a person joins. I don't care what they get coaching for. We as coaches need to lock arms, build a network, build a overall community where maybe my way isn't the right way. And that's where they can come to you, or maybe our way isn't the right way. And they can go to, Sarah P. Maybe they want to go more into minerals or more into the deuterium or, that realm. That's great. Many people just end up and need somewhere to end up and know. And like I said, as a voice in some of these communities, we need to be able to find a common ground and lock arms and move this momentum. The people that we are fighting and pushing back against that are creating an addiction model, and yes, I get very passionate about this, the people that are creating an addiction model are a lot bigger than any of us as one individual. And we need to be able to come together and push back together and get this voice out there of there is hope, there is help. You just end up and need to find what niche is yours. Like I said, maybe it's not the BNC community. I also do personal coaching that I do anywhere from Carnivore to Circadian, right? And maybe it's not me, maybe it's not you, maybe it's, others that we've built this network with. And so that is the biggest thing for anyone is there is hope. You are not a failure. We just have to get you on the right track and break that addiction model.
Yeah, and that's a stunningly good point. There are people out there in laboratories, in big food companies that are trying to make you addicted to terrible food. I mean, that is what we're fighting. $1 billion industry that is designed to make you eat more food, and the wrong food, actually, the food that they are serving up. So it's worth getting passionate about, Becky, because the thing is, between us, as you say, hundreds of thousands of people realize that this is what's going on. And there are people out there that we can reverse all the diseases. We can help them with their emotional eating and all that sort of stuff. So it's an admirable cause. And that's why I'm not protective. I'll have people on. I'm happy to put all your links in the description. If people want to hook up with you, not book my coaching, that's totally fine with me. Because if in the end someone says, I watched your video, I went to Becky and I felt really great, then that's job done. That's job done for me. So if you could just humor me for the next 20 seconds, because what I'm experimenting with is pointing to the next video while we finish the interview. I just want to say to people, you can watch this next video, which will be sort of related to what we've just said, or you can subscribe down here. I'm doing all the pointing, and Becky's description, in the description is all her links. All right. So that's about the end of the interview. So Becky, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you for having me on. And yeah, absolutely. It was always a pleasure to reconnect with you and help this movement moving forward. I look forward to possibly chatting again in the future. Thanks,
Yeah,
Stephen.
we will. We definitely will. But to the people out there, don't forget, watch the next video. It will really help.